I am Gabriel Foster, 69 years old, and I am watching them lower my wife of 45 years into the cold, wet ground. I am standing alone in the pouring November rain. 20 feet away, under a large black golf umbrella, my son Dennis and his wife Valerie are checking their phones. I can see Valerie tap the screen of her watch. She's impatient. The next morning they arrived at my house at 9 a.m. Sharp to demand I sell my home. They thought I was a broken old man with nothing left. They thought I was weak. They had no idea what Matilda, my Matilda, had left me, and they had no idea that her final gift was their complete destruction. Before I tell you what happened next, please let me know where you're listening from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe that greed always reveals itself. The rain was relentless, a cold, miserable Nashville downpour that turned the cemetery grass into a muddy swamp. It felt appropriate. The sky was crying. The tears I couldn't seem to find. My grief was a heavy, cold stone in my gut, too heavy for tears. My name is Gabriel Foster, 69 years old, and the woman in that dark cherry wood casket, that was Matilda, my wife, my compass, my partner for 45 years. I stood there, my thin black suit soaked through the cold water dripping from my gray hair onto my face. The pastor had long finished his words, his voice drowned out by the storm. The other mourners, mostly old friends of mine from the woodshop program I taught for 40 years, had already paid their respects. They were good people. They patted my shoulder, their eyes full of real sadness. "Take care of yourself, Gabe," one of them, my old colleague Mike, had said. His eyes flickered over to my son and daughter-in-law, who hadn't moved from their spot. Mike's gaze was confused. He didn't understand. I didn't understand either. Dennis, my only son, 42 years old. Valerie, his wife of 15 years. They were dry. They were comfortable. They were 20 feet away. Dennis works in financial consulting. That's what he calls it. It always sounded vague to me, a job title full of buzzwords and expensive suits, but not much substance. Valerie is in real estate. She talks about curb appeal and property values the way other people talk about their children. She has sharp eyes and a smile that never ever reaches them. I watched them. Valerie adjusted the umbrella, tilting it slightly more toward herself, letting the runoff splash onto Dennis's $1,000 shoes. He didn't seem to notice. He was scrolling intently through something on his phone. Not once had he looked at me. Not once had Valerie shed a tear. They had been impatient at the hospital, impatient at the funeral home, and now they were impatient at the graveside. The thud of the first shovel of wet dirt hitting the casket was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was so final. It was the sound of a door slamming shut forever. Matilda and I, we built our small cabin just outside Nashville with our own hands. Literally. I'd come home from the high school woodshop, and she'd have the plans laid out. We nailed every board, laid every shingle. We raised Dennis in that house. We weren't rich, not in the way Valerie and Dennis measured wealth. We had our pensions, our small savings, and that house. That house was our life. It was filled with the smell of sawdust, baking bread, and 45 years of quiet, steady love. A small ding sound carried across the wet grass. Valerie's phone. She sighed, annoyed, and tapped out a quick reply. Then she nudged Dennis and pointed at her watch. The last car, Mike's car, pulled slowly out of the cemetery gates. It was just us now. Me, my son, his wife, and the fresh, muddy grave of the woman who had been our center. They finally began to walk over their expensive shoes, sinking into the mud. Valerie's face was a mask of disgust as she tried to avoid the worst of the puddles. They stopped a few feet in front of me. The umbrella did not extend to cover me. The cold rain ran down my collar. Dennis cleared his throat. He looked at the grave, not at me. "Dad," he said. His voice was flat, rehearsed. I know you're upset, but we need to be realistic. Realistic. That's a word they use a lot. It usually means they want something. It usually means my feelings are inconvenient. I just stared at him. Upset, my wife is dead. My wife, your mother, is in that box covered in mud. Upset doesn't even begin to cover it. Before I could speak, Valerie stepped in, taking charge. She always takes charge. Gabe, she said, using my first name. She'd started doing that a few years ago. She said Dad sounded too old. We're coming over tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. I frowned, confused. The rain was blurring my vision. Tomorrow? Why tomorrow? There are some important papers regarding the house, she said, her voice sharp, cutting through the sound of the storm. We need to review them immediately. It's time sensitive. I couldn't process it. Papers House Matilda has been in the ground for 10 minutes. I don't understand, I stammered. What papers? It's just administrative stuff, Dad. Dennis mumbled, finally looking at me. His eyes were empty. To help you. Valerie's patience snapped. I saw it in the tightening of her jaw. Gabe, we don't have time to argue about this in the rain. We have things to handle. This is what's best. We will be at the house at 9 a.m. Please, just be there. Don't go anywhere. Her tone. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a discussion. It was an order. She was speaking to me like I was a child or a disobedient employee. She pulled on Dennis's arm. Let's go, I'm freezing. Dennis gave me a short, awkward nod. It's for the best, Dad. We'll sort it all out tomorrow. They turned and walked away. They didn't hug me. They didn't say, "Are you okay?" They didn't say, "Do you need a ride home?" They just left. I stood there alone, watching their black Lexus splash through the puddles and disappear down the cemetery road. I was soaked to the bone. I was frozen. But the cold I felt on my skin was nothing compared to the ice that was forming in my chest. I looked down at the muddy plot of earth. "Oh, Matilda," I whispered to the rain. "What's happening?" Matilda had always been the practical one, the one who saw things clearly. She always said, "Gabe, you see the good in everyone. I see the math, and the math with those two. It just doesn't add up." I never understood what she meant. I was about to. I walked the 2 miles home in the storm. I needed the cold. I needed the pain. When I got back to our cabin, the house was silent, empty. The smell of her, of baking bread and sawdust was already fading. I sat in my wet clothes in our old armchair, staring at the clock. 9 a.m. It felt less like a meeting and more like an execution. And I was right. I didn't have to wait long. I was in the kitchen, still in my pajamas, and Matilda's old wool robe staring at 2 eggs in a pan that I had no appetite to eat. The clock on the wall, the one I'd built in my shop 40 years ago, clicked to exactly 9 a.m. I didn't hear a knock. I heard a key sliding into the lock of my front door. Dennis had a key, of course. He was my son. But he had never used it without knocking, not in 20 years. It was a violation, a small but sharp signal that the rules had changed. The door opened. Valerie walked in first, as she always did. She strode into my kitchen, the one Matilda had painted a soft yellow just last spring. The clack, clack, clack of her high heels on the pine floorboards I had laid by hand was like gunfire in the silence. She was holding a leather clipboard in one hand and a large, steaming Starbucks cup in the other. Her perfume, something sharp and expensive, instantly smothered the faint, lingering scent of Matilda's baking spices that I had been clinging to. "Hi, Dad," she said. She didn't look at me, but at the room, her eyes scanning the countertops, the old linoleum, the copper pots Matilda and I had bought at a flea market. Her lip curled just slightly. Disgust. Dennis followed behind her, a shadow in her wake. He wouldn't look at me. He just stared at the floor. Valerie, I said. My voice was hoarse. I hadn't used it all morning. Gabe, she corrected, not unkindly but firmly. She had stopped calling me Dad about a year ago. She said it was cleaner for her real estate branding. Look, I've talked to our lawyer this morning. She placed her coffee cup on Matilda's recipe box, leaving a wet ring. With Mom's situation, and now that you're alone, the best thing is to sell this house. Immediately. The words hit me. I physically recoiled, grabbing the edge of the counter. The 2 eggs in the pan hissed, the yolks breaking. Sell. I managed to get out. Sell the house, Matilda. Matilda just passed yesterday. Her funeral was yesterday. Dad, this house is too big. Dennis finally spoke, his voice low, directed at his shoes. It's old. The maintenance. It'll eat up all your meager savings. Meager. That word again. The word they used to describe my life's work as a teacher, the pension I had earned, the small, careful investments Matilda and I had made. Meager. You can't manage on your own, he added. Valerie nodded, opening her clipboard. He's right. The roof will need replacing in the next 5 years. That's $20,000 right there. The plumbing is all original copper, it's a liability. And the heating bills for a place this size, you're looking at a financial black hole, Gabe. You'll be broke in a year. She said it with a cold, matter-of-fact certainty, as if she were discussing a stock portfolio, not the home where my wife had died just 3 days ago. I can manage, I said, my voice rising. This is my home. This is where I couldn't finish. I looked at the worn spot on the floor by the sink, where Matilda had stood every day for 45 years, looking out the window at the bird feeder. I looked at the height chart we had penciled on the doorframe, marking Dennis's growth from a little boy. Bo kung the tu lo duk do, Dennis repeated as if reading from a script. You can't manage Dad. And you don't need to, Valerie said, her voice softening into a tone I trusted even less. It was her closing the deal voice. That's why we've already found a perfect solution. She tapped her clipboard. It's a wonderful community. Golden Horizons. It's clean, it's secure, and they have nurses on site 24/7. You won't have to worry about a thing. Golden Horizons. I repeated the name, tasting like ash in my mouth. A retirement home. You want to put me in a home. It's not a home, Dad, Dennis said, finally looking up, and his eyes pleading but also hard. It's a senior living community. It's what's best. You'll be safe. We won't have to worry. Worry, I said. You weren't worried yesterday, Dennis. You were on your phone. Dennis flinched, his face turning red. Valerie shot him a furious look before turning back to me, her smile gone, her eyes like steel. Gabe, we don't have time for this emotional debate, she said. I've talked to my broker. This house is on a prime lot. The land alone is worth at least $900,000. We are not going to let that kind of money get stuck here just because you're feeling sentimental. Sentimental. I was choking on the word. This is my life, Matilda's life. And that life is over, she said, her voice cutting. Now it's time to be practical. It's time to think about the future. Our future. Your future. She made it sound like they were the same thing. I knew they were not. I am not selling my house, I said. My voice was low, but it didn't shake. I was a teacher for 40 years. I knew how to handle bullies. Valerie's smile returned, and this time it was terrifying. It was a shark's smile. Actually, Gabe, she said, you might not have a choice. Dennis stepped forward, pulling a folded paper from his suit jacket. Dad, this is why we need to act. This is the power of attorney Mom signed. I stared at the paper. It was the document they had rushed her to sign a few months ago, just before she went in for that minor gallbladder surgery. It's just a formality, Dad, Dennis had said at the time. just in case, so I can talk to the doctors. But this paper looked different. It was thicker. This is a durable power of attorney, Gabe, Valerie said, her voice smooth as oil. It covers financial decisions as well as medical. Matilda signed it. It gives Dennis the authority to make decisions in your collective best interest. And since you are clearly grieving and not in a state to make rational financial decisions, she left the threat hanging in the air. My breath caught. They had planned this. This wasn't a sudden idea born of grief. This was a coup. They had waited perhaps for months for Matilda to get sick. They had put the pen in her hand, and my loving, trusting wife, she had signed her own husband's eviction notice. A real estate broker is coming this afternoon at 3 p.m. to do a formal appraisal, Valerie said, snapping her clipboard shut. The sound was as final as the dirt hitting the casket. We expect you to be cooperative, Gabe, for your own good. It's what Matilda would have wanted. That was the line. Get out, I whispered. What? Valerie said, stepping back, genuinely surprised. I said, get out, I roared. The voice didn't sound like mine. It was the voice of a man who had nothing left to lose. I grabbed the pan of eggs still hot and hurled it into the sink. The clatter was explosive. Get out of my house, both of you, now! Valerie's face turned white with rage. Dennis grabbed her arm. Valerie, let's go. He's hysterical. This just proves our point. This isn't over, Gabe. Valerie spat, her eyes full of venom. You can't fight this. We have the law on our side. We're just trying to help you. By tomorrow, you'll be thanking us. They backed out of the kitchen and slammed the front door. I stood there shaking in the sudden deafening silence. My kitchen smelled of burnt eggs and Valerie's sharp perfume. Hysterical, meager savings, grieving and not rational. They thought I was a broken-down old man. They thought I was alone. They thought I was weak. They didn't know Matilda. They didn't know what she was capable of. I went to my bedroom, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with a cold, clear purpose. I walked past the bed we had shared over to the old woodworking bench I kept in the corner. Matilda always said, Gabe, you see the good in everyone. I see the math. I ran my hand along the underside of the bench, my fingers searching for the small hidden latch I hadn't touched in years. It was time to see Matilda's math. Valerie stepped forward, placing her hand on Dennis's arm, silencing him. Her voice when she spoke was like honey mixed with glass, sickeningly sweet but sharp underneath. And you don't need to, Gabe. That's the good news. She tapped the clipboard she was holding like a weapon. That's why we've already found a perfect solution. I just looked at her. My kitchen, my home felt alien. It felt cold. It's a wonderful community. She continued, her words quick and rehearsed like a sales pitch she had practiced in the car on the way over. It's called Golden Horizons. It's state-of-the-art, completely secure. Golden Horizons. The name sounded like a cheap casino, or maybe a brand of dog food. It's clean, she went on, her eyes scanning my kitchen again, lingering on the spice rack Matilda had built as if it were filthy. They have social activities, bingo, movie nights. They have nurses on site 24/7. You'll make friends your own age, people you can relate to. She smiled a bright plastic smile that didn't touch her cold real estate eyes. You won't have to worry about a thing. And then she delivered the final blow, the one that stopped my heart. And, she added, as if it were a minor happy afterthought, you won't have to bother us anymore. There it was. The sound in the kitchen seemed to die. The hiss of the burnt eggs in the pan, the steady tick-tock of the clock I built, the drip of the rain outside. Everything just stopped. Bother. The word came out as a whisper. It was dry, cracked. It didn't even sound like my voice. I felt the blood drain from my face and then return with a hot, painful rush. My hands resting on the counter began to shake. Bother. Was I a bother when I co-signed the loan for their first house, the house they sold 2 years later for a $100,000 profit? A profit they never offered to share, a profit they used to buy that black Lexus Valerie now drove. Was I a bother when I spent 6 months of my retirement hand-building the custom cherrywood cabinetry in their new kitchen? The kitchen, Valerie later told her friends, was too rustic and had painted over in a hideous shade of gray. Was I a bother? Was Matilda a bother? When I drove over at 3 in the morning, night after night, to sit with her in that sterile hospital room during her last week, Dennis hadn't come. He said he couldn't handle it. Dad, I just can't see her like that. You're stronger than me. You go. I went. I held her hand. I was the one there when she took her last shallow breath. I was there. Alone. And now, less than 48 hours after I had closed my wife's eyes for the last time, I was a bother. Dennis must have seen the look on my face. He finally looked up from his shoes, his own face pale and blotchy. He looked guilty. But guilt is a useless, cowardly emotion when it doesn't lead to action. Dad, she didn't mean it like that, he stammered, running a hand through his expensive gelled hair. Oh, but I did, Valerie said, her voice turning sharp. The sweetness was gone, replaced by the brittle impatience I'd heard at the cemetery. Gabe, we have to be honest here. You are a lot to manage. You're 69 years old. You just lost your wife. You are going to fall apart. It's inevitable. It's what happens. She took a step closer, invading my space. And Dennis and I, we are at the absolute peak of our careers. We cannot put our lives on hold to babysit you. Babysit me. I had built the very chair she was leaning against. I had taught her husband how to ride a bicycle. I had held him when he broke his arm falling from the oak tree in the backyard. The tree I had planted. I was a bother. I needed babysitting. I couldn't speak. I was choking on the words, on the absolute stunning betrayal. This wasn't my son. This was a stranger. This was a hollowed-out shell wearing my son's face, and this woman, this predator, was pulling his strings. Valerie saw my silence as weakness. She mistook my shock for surrender. She smiled that victorious shark-like smile. Look, she said, her voice softening again, as if she were speaking to a difficult child. This is happening, Gabe. I've already put a deposit down on the room at Golden Horizons. A non-refundable deposit. You what? The words tore out of my throat. You paid a deposit with what money? With your money, of course, she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Well, technically, with your and Matilda's money, from the joint savings account. Dennis has access, remember? Dennis looked away again, ashamed, but not ashamed enough to stop her. It's for the best, Valerie said. It's all decided. A real estate broker is coming this afternoon at 3 p.m. to do a formal appraisal. We expect you to be cooperative. Valerie let out a long, theatrical sigh. The kind of sigh that says, I am so tired of dealing with this. The mask of the concerned daughter-in-law evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard face of a broker who was about to lose a deal. Gabe, she said, her voice flat and sharp, all the fake honey gone. You have to be realistic. She walked over to the kitchen window, the one that overlooked the backyard workshop, and gestured dismissively at the half-acre of land, at the tall oak trees Matilda had loved. This isn't about you, she said. This is about an asset. This house, this land. It's on a prime lot. It's prime development land. It is worth in the current market at least $900,000. Maybe more if we market it right. $900,000. She said it like it was the only thing that mattered, the only truth in the room. We, she continued, turning to face me, her eyes narrow, cannot let that kind of equity, that kind of capital, just sit here, stuck, while you figure out your feelings. Dennis and I need that capital. We have business opportunities. Capital, I whispered. My home. My 45 years of memories. It was capital. I am not selling, I said again, but my voice was weaker. The shock was paralyzing me. Dad. Dennis's voice was quiet, but it cut through everything. He stepped forward, pulling a folded paper from the inside pocket of his expensive suit jacket. He didn't look at me. He just placed it on the kitchen table right on top of Matilda's worn-out copy of The Joy of Cooking. Actually, he said, his voice barely audible, this is the document Mom signed a few months ago before she went to the hospital. I stared at the paper. It was thick, legal-sized, with a blue backing. I recognized it. A cold dread, colder than the rain at the cemetery, washed over me. I remembered that day, 3 months ago. Matilda had been nervous about her gallbladder surgery. Dennis had come over all smiles and efficiency. It's just a formality, Dad, he had said, holding a pen out to Matilda at this very table. It's a durable power of attorney. It just means I can talk to the doctors for you both, make medical decisions if you're, unable to. Matilda had looked at me. It makes sense, Gabe. Dennis is right. She trusted him. Our son, she trusted him. I watched her hand, already weakened by her illness, trace her signature. Matilda B. Foster. She had joked, well, now you're in charge of my gallbladder, Denny. He had laughed. He had kissed her on the forehead. Just a formality, Mom. Don't you worry about a thing. He had lied. I looked at the paper on my table. I didn't need to read it. I could see the title now, just peeking out. Durable Power of Attorney, Financial and Medical. Valerie stepped up, placing her manicured fingernail on the paper, tapping it. Tap, tap, tap. It gives us, she said, emphasizing the word, us, the legal right to make decisions in your, and Matilda's, best interest now that she's gone and you are compromised. Compromised, I said the word, feeling foreign. I am not compromised. I am grieving. There is a difference. Not to the law there isn't, Valerie said with a shrug, as if this were all a boring inconvenience. Grieving, compromised, not thinking rationally. It's all the same. It means you are not in a position to manage a $900,000 asset. But we are. She picked up her Starbucks cup and took a long, slow sip, watching me over the rim. And it's in our best interest, she continued, and yours, of course, that this asset be liquidated immediately. A check from a lawyer will be arriving at Golden Horizons for you. You'll be very comfortable. I was speechless. This was a coup, a betrayal so deep and so planned out that I couldn't even find the words to fight it. They had used Matilda's illness, used her trust, to forge the very weapon they were now using to destroy me. Valerie walked to the door. A real estate broker is coming this afternoon, 3 p.m. His name is Todd. He'll be doing the formal appraisal. She paused her hand on the doorknob and looked back at me. I was just an old man in a worn-out robe standing in a kitchen that was no longer mine, my world reduced to ashes in the span of 10 minutes. She gave me one last cold smile. Please, Gabe, just don't get in the way. Don't make this messy. Dennis hadn't said another word. He just followed her out the door. The lock clicked. They were gone. I stood there for a long time. I don't know how long. An hour, maybe 2. The eggs in the pan were cold and rubbery. The kitchen was silent except for the tick-tock of the clock on the wall. Tick-tock. I did not cry. I should have. My wife was gone. My son had just revealed himself to be a vulture. I should have collapsed in that old armchair and let the grief and the shock finally drown me. But the tears wouldn't come. Instead, a coldness I had never felt before settled deep in my chest. It was like a sheet of ice forming over a turbulent river. The pain was still there, raging underneath, but on the surface, I was calm. I was focused. I was acting. My mind went back as it always did to Matilda. I could hear her voice as clear as if she were standing right next to me, her hands covered in flour. "Gabe," she'd say, tapping a spoon on my arm as I stared at one of Dennis's bank statements years ago. "You see the good in everyone. I see the math. The math doesn't add up." I had dismissed it. He was our son. He just wasn't good with numbers, I'd said. "No, Gabe," she'd insisted, her voice quiet but firm. "Dennis has your heart, but he has Valerie's spending hands, and that is a dangerous combination." Valerie's spending hands. Matilda had seen it from day one. She saw the rot. I looked around the kitchen at the lingering, sicky-sweet smell of Valerie's perfume, at the wet ring her Starbucks cup had left on Matilda's recipe box. This was my house, Matilda's house, and they were coming back at 3 p.m. to put a price on it like a piece of meat at a butcher's shop. No, I didn't cry. I moved. I walked to the back door, bypassing my slippers and shoving my bare feet into my old mud-caked work boots. I didn't bother with a jacket. The cold rain felt good. It felt sharp. It matched the ice inside me. I crossed the small backyard, the wet grass soaking the cuffs of my pajamas. I walked to my workshop. This was my place, though. The one place Dennis and Valerie never entered. It was old. It smelled of cedar, of motor oil, of iron. It smelled of honest work. Inside, everything was in its place. My chisels hung in a neat row. My lathe was clean oiled. My saws were sharp. 40 years of order. 40 years of control. I walked to the far corner, past the workbench, to a section of the floor that always looked a little off. The pine boards were darker, older. This was part of the original cabin foundation laid down in 1978. I knelt, my old knees cracking in protest, and ran my fingers along the seam of one particular board. I found the small carved notch invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. It was a carpenter's trick. I slipped the edge of my utility knife into the seam and pried. The board groaned, then lifted up with a soft pop. We always called it the poor man's safe. A little joke between me and Matilda. When we first built the house, we'd hide our Christmas money under it. But this was different. Underneath, in the dark, dusty crawl space, sat a small, gray, fireproof metal box. It was old, but the latch was clean. Matilda. I hadn't seen this box in 20 years. Not since Dennis had his first real financial trouble in college. Matilda had taken some money out, and I had assumed she'd used it all to bail him out. I reached down into the cold earth, and my fingers brushed against the metal. It was heavy, heavier than it should have been. I pulled it out. It was a simple sentry box, the kind you buy at an office supply store. I wiped the dust and cobwebs from the lid. I carried it back to the house, holding it against my chest, the cold metal soaking through my pajamas. The rain was letting up, but I didn't notice. I walked back into the kitchen they had violated. I placed the box squarely on the table, right on the wet ring Valerie's Starbucks cup had left behind. I stood there looking at it. I had no idea what was inside. I just knew. This was the math. This was Matilda's math. This was the beginning of her plan. And it was the beginning of mine. The lock was small and rusted at the edges. Of course it was locked. Matilda was the most thorough person I had ever known. She never left a drawer unlocked, never left a bill unpaid, never left a single part of her life to chance. My hands were shaking, the adrenaline from the confrontation with Dennis and Valerie wearing off, leaving the deep, bone-aching tremor of grief and now fear. I looked around the kitchen. A key. A small key. Where would she hide a key? Then I remembered. The old sugar bowl on the top shelf. The one her grandmother had given her. It was ornate china, and we hadn't used it for sugar in 30 years. It was where she kept spare buttons, old receipts, and… yes. My hand fumbled as I reached for it. Inside, under a tangle of white shirt buttons, was a tiny, intricate brass key. It fit. The click of the lock opening was deafening in the silence of the kitchen. It sounded like a joint popping like a bone setting. I lifted the heavy metal lid. The hinges creaked in protest. The inside smelled of old paper and cedar, and faintly of her. Her lavender sachet. A wave of grief so powerful it almost knocked me off my chair hit me. I closed my eyes, my hand frozen over the box. "Oh, Matilda," I whispered. "I'm not ready for this. I'm not ready for your ghosts." But they were already at the door. They were coming back at 3 o'clock. I had to be ready. I opened my eyes and looked inside. It wasn't what I expected. There was no cash, no hidden jewelry, no gold coins. It was almost empty. Resting on a bed of faded black velvet were just two things. The first was a key, a heavy, serious, old-fashioned key. It was long brass and had a number stamped into the head, 417, a safe deposit box key. Beneath it was a single thick, cream-colored envelope. My name was written on the front, in her perfect, elegant cursive. Gabe. Just my name. My hand trembled so violently I could barely pick it up. This was it. This was a letter from her. A letter from the dead. I tore it open, ripping the paper. I unfolded the thick stationery. It was several pages. "Gabe, my love." I had to stop. I put the letter down on the table. I couldn't breathe. To see her words, to hear her voice in my head, so clear, so present. It was too much. The tears I couldn't shed at the cemetery, the tears I held back in the rain, they came now. Hot, silent, angry tears. I was so alone. "No," I said out loud to the empty room. "Get it together, Gabe. She did this for a reason." I wiped my face on the sleeve of my robe, took a deep, ragged breath, and picked up the letter again. "Gabe, my love, if you are reading this, it means I am gone." I nodded. "I'm here, Tilda. I'm here. And it means they have come." A chill colder than the rain shot straight down my spine. I read the line again. It means they have come. She knew, she knew. They came for the house, didn't they? I looked up from the page, my eyes darting around the kitchen, as if Dennis and Valerie were still there, as if they were ghosts too. They probably came the morning after my funeral. Am I right? I let out a sound, half a laugh, half a sob. "How, Matilda? How did you know?" I read on my heart pounding against my ribs. "Don't trust them, Gabe. Don't trust anything they say. Don't sign anything. I know you. I know your good heart. You will want to believe them. You will want to see your son, but the son we raised is not the man who is married to that woman. Don't sign anything." I thought of the power of attorney. My stomach dropped. Oh God, had I failed her already? She signed that. Dennis and Valerie had brought the papers to sell the house. I hadn't signed those. I had thrown them out. I had roared like a wounded animal. I hadn't signed. This house, Gabe, this house is just bait. It's the cheese in the trap. And I set it for them. I couldn't understand. Bait? What did she mean? I have been worried about Dennis for a long time. Longer than I ever told you. I saw how Valerie looks at our home. I saw her eyes the first time she came here for dinner. She wasn't looking at our family photos. She was counting our floorboards. She was appraising the land. She's a vulture, Gabe. And she has been poisoning our son for years. Valerie's voice from an hour ago echoed in my head. Prime development land. At least $900,000. We cannot let that capital get stuck here. Matilda had been right. She had seen the vulture, and I had just served it coffee. I have done some things, my love, the letter continued. I didn't tell you not to hide them, but to protect you, to protect us. You have too much good in your heart. You would have given them every last penny to fix them to bail Dennis out again. But some things can't be fixed, Gabe. Some people are black holes. They can only be managed. I have managed them, or at least I have set up a way for you to manage them. Go to the bank, the First National on Church Street, the main branch. Use this key. The key in the box, number 4107. Ask for Mr. Kendrick, Mr. James Kendrick. Kendrick. I knew that name. He was the bank president. Matilda had served on a charity board with him years ago. Mr. Kendrick knows everything. He has been my advisor for the last 5 years. He holds all the documents. He has the real math. Her advisor, my Matilda. The woman who I thought was just balancing our simple checkbook. What math? I read the last page. Her handwriting, usually so strong, was a little shaky here. She must have written this near the end. Be strong, Gabe. Be the man I always loved. Be my carpenter. Measure twice, cut once. They think you are old and broken. They think you are a bother. They think you are a meager old man who needs babysitting. I heard them, Gabe. I heard them whispering outside my hospital room when they thought I was asleep. They think they are coming to pick a carcass clean. My blood turned to ice. They had said those things while she was still alive. Show them what you are made of. Show them what we built. Your hands are strong. Your mind is sharp. Do not let them take our life's work. Do not let them win. Build your world again, my love, and live in it. Live well. I love you always. M. I sat there for a long time, the letter clutched in my hand. The kitchen was utterly silent. My tears were gone. The coldness in my chest had turned into something else. It was steel. She had known. She had seen it all. The disrespect, the greed, the plot. She had listened to them call her dying husband a bother, and she had used her last remaining strength not to cry, but to plan. She had left me a map. She had left me a set of blueprints. She had left me a weapon. A carpenter, I whispered out loud. My voice was no longer hoarse. It was steady. Measure twice, cut once. I looked at the clock. 10:30 a.m. The broker was coming at 3 p.m. I folded the letter and put it in my pocket over my heart. I picked up the heavy brass key. Okay, Tilda, I said to the empty room. Okay, let's go build. I didn't even change. I walked out of my house, my sanctuary, wearing my old pajamas, Matilda's wool robe, and my mud-caked work boots. I didn't care. I looked like a crazy, broken old man, and that was just fine. Let them think it. I must have been a sight walking down the street to the bus stop. I didn't have a car. We only ever had one car, Matilda's old Toyota. Dennis and Valerie had borrowed it after she got sick. They said it was safer if they drove it. They never brought it back. I got on the bus. People looked away. A sad old man in his robe. They felt pity. I was used to it. The First National Bank on Church Street is one of those old-time banks. It was built in the 1920s. It has giant marble columns, ceilings so high they echo, and floors so polished you can see your reflection. I walked in. My work boots squeaked on the marble. The entire bank went silent. A young woman at the front desk in a sharp blue suit looked up at me with a pained smile, the kind you give a homeless person who wanders in by mistake. "Sir," she said, her voice dripping with false politeness, "can I help you with something?" She was already reaching for the security button under her desk. I didn't look at her. I looked past her at the heavy vault door at the back of the bank. "I'm here to see Mr. Kendrick," I said. My voice was low and rough from disuse. Her smile faltered. "Mr. Kendrick, sir. Mr. Kendrick is the bank president. He sees clients by appointment only." "My name is Gabriel Foster," I said, pulling the heavy brass key from my robe pocket. I placed it on the marble counter. The sound was loud. "Matilda Foster sent me. Key 417. He's expecting me." The woman's eyes widened. She looked from the key to my face back to the key. The pity was gone, replaced by confusion and a little bit of fear. "Mr. Foster," she stammered. "Right. Of course, please, just one moment." She picked up her phone and whispered frantically into it. "Mr. Kendrick, there is a Mr. Gabriel Foster here." "Yes, sir. With the key." "Yes, I'll send him right back." She hung up, her face pale. "His office is on the top floor, sir. The elevator is to your right. He will meet you there." The elevator doors opened, and James Kendrick was standing there. He was my age, tall, impeccable in a gray suit. He wasn't smiling. He looked sad. He looked respectful. "Gabe," he said, extending his hand. He didn't call me Mr. Foster. "I am so sorry for your loss. Matilda was a remarkable woman." "You knew her well," I said. It wasn't a question. "For the last 5 years, yes," he said, his grip firm. "She was one of our sharpest clients. Please come with me." He didn't take me to his office. He took me back down in his private elevator to the vault. He led me through the massive circular steel door into a quiet, cold room lined with thousands of metal boxes. He stopped at a section near the floor. 417, he said. He took a key from his own pocket. "Bank policy requires both our keys." He slid his key in. I slid mine in. The lock turned with a heavy, satisfying thunk. He pulled out a long metal box. It was heavy. He handed it to me. "The viewing room is just here. Take all the time you need, Gabe. When you're finished, we'll talk." I went into the small, wood-paneled room. It was silent. Just a table and a chair. I placed the heavy box on the table and sat down. For a moment, I couldn't open it. This was it. This was her last secret. I lifted the lid. I was expecting something. Jewelry. My grandfather's watch. Old love letters. It was none of those. It was full of paper. Thick, dense, heavy stacks of paper. Ledgers, stock certificates, brokerage statements, and deeds. My rough carpenter's hands, stained with wood varnish and grease, fumbled with the glossy official documents. I saw a deed for a commercial property in the Gulch, a retail space. My eyes scanned the purchase price, then the estimated current value. My breath hitched. I pulled out another. An office building near the university. Another. A small apartment complex in East Nashville. I pulled out a brokerage statement from Morgan Stanley. The name on the account was the Matilda B. Foster Revocable Trust. I looked at the numbers. I saw a 1. I saw a 5. I saw 6 zeros after them. I dropped the paper as if it had burned me. $15 million. My wife. My Matilda. The woman who drove a 15-year-old Toyota. The woman who religiously cut coupons from the Sunday paper. The woman who I thought was just balancing our meager, there's that word again, our meager checkbook on her old laptop. She wasn't just balancing. She was investing. She was day trading. She was buying and selling real estate. For 30 years, she had been taking our small savings, the little bits left over from my teacher's salary, and her part-time bookkeeping, and she had built an empire. An empire in secret. An empire worth over $15 million. She had protected me. She had protected us. Not just from Dennis, but from the money itself. She knew what it could do. She had kept our lives simple, pure, real. and now she had passed that empire to me. I sat there in that cold, silent room, a 69-year-old man in his pajamas, staring at a number I couldn't even comprehend. The house. The $900,000 house that Valerie was salivating over. It was nothing. It was bait. It was the cheese in the trap, just as she'd said. At the very bottom of the box beneath all the paper was a single simple black USB flash drive. I looked at it. This was the rest of it. This was the math she was talking about. I put the deeds back in the box, closed the lid, and stood up. I walked out of the viewing room holding the box. Mr. Kendrick was waiting. "Are you all right, Gabe?" I looked at him, my mind clear for the first time since Matilda's funeral. The grief was still there, a heavy stone. But now it had a purpose. "I am not all right," I said. "But I'm ready." "Good," he said. "Because there's one more thing. It's about Dennis." I didn't go back to the viewing room. I just stood there in the middle of the bank vault's hallway holding the heavy metal box. The USB drive felt cold in my hand. James Kendrick was waiting for me just outside the massive steel door, his expression unreadable but kind. He didn't seem to notice that I was a 69-year-old man standing in a multi-million-dollar bank vault wearing a worn-out robe and muddy boots. He just looked at me with a profound, quiet respect. "Let's go to my office, Gabe," he said gently. "We have a lot to discuss." His office was on the top floor. It was vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city of Nashville. It was a room that smelled of old leather wood polish and serious money. He closed the heavy oak door, and the silence was absolute. "Coffee?" he asked. I just shook my head, my throat too tight to speak. I sat in one of the deep leather chairs opposite his desk. I placed the metal box on the floor and put the small black USB drive on his pristine desk blotter. Kendrick sat down, steepled his fingers, and looked at me. He didn't rush me. He just waited. Matilda," I finally managed to say, my voice a dry rasp. "The box, $15 million. I don't understand." Kendrick nodded slowly. "I've been waiting for this call, Gabe," he said, his voice soft but clear. "I was Matilda's advisor for the last 5 years, and her lawyer. I am the executor of her trust. I am so terribly sorry for your loss, but I need you to know, your wife was the most thorough, brilliant, and protective woman I have ever met." "Thorough," I repeated the word, feeling small. She was cutting coupons on Sunday and turning those coupon savings into a real estate empire on Monday," Kendrick replied without a hint of irony. "She never trusted banks to just hold money, Gabe. She trusted herself to grow it. And she was a genius at it." I looked at the USB drive still sitting between us. "But why? Why all this? Why the secrecy? Why didn't she tell me?" The question hung in the air, the real painful question that was tearing me apart. Had our whole life been a lie? "She didn't hide it from you, Gabe," Kendrick said, leaning forward. "She hid it for you. She was protecting you. Protecting me from what I'm her husband. From Dennis." The name hit me like a physical blow. Kendrick saw my expression and his face hardened. "Gabe, what did Dennis and Valerie do this morning?" I told him. I told him about the 9 a.m. arrival, the demands, the real estate broker, Golden Horizons, the power of attorney, the word bother, the word capital. Kendrick just nodded, his face getting darker with every word. He wasn't surprised. He was just confirmed. "They are more desperate than I even thought," he murmured. He looked me straight in the eye. "Gabe, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Your wife was not just thorough. She was prophetic. Dennis is not just bad with money. He is ruined." "Ruined? What do you mean he has a good job?" "He had a good job," Kendrick corrected. "He was fired 3 months ago for mismanaging client funds. He's been living off credit cards ever since. As of my last report, your son Dennis is in debt for approximately $1.9 million. I felt the room tilt. What 1.9? That's impossible. How? Failed tech startups he invested in without any due diligence, Kendrick said, ticking items off on his fingers. 2 consulting firms that were just shell companies to funnel cash. And most recently, several large unsecured personal loans from some very unsavory lenders. The kind of people who don't care about your credit score but do care about your kneecaps. My son, my little boy Denny, $2 million in debt to loan sharks. That's why they're so desperate for the house, I whispered. That $900,000, it's not for capital. It's to save his skin. Exactly, Kendrick said. And your wife knew it. She knew all of it. How? I looked at the USB drive. How could she know all of this? This was the moment. Kendrick took a deep breath. Gabe, Matilda knew she didn't have much time. The cancer was more aggressive than she let on even to me. 6 months ago, when Dennis and Valerie first pushed her to sign that power of attorney, she didn't just call me. He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. She hired a private investigator. I just stared at him. A private. What, my Matilda? She hired the best firm in the state. She had them do a full financial workup on Dennis and a full background check on Valerie. And then she had them followed. For 6 months. My mind simply refused to accept it. This was the stuff of movies of spy thrillers. This wasn't my life. This wasn't my quiet, simple wife who loved to garden. Kendrick pointed to the small black flash drive on his desk, the one that had been in the box. That, he said, is the complete file from the investigator. Everything. Every bank transfer. Every desperate phone call Dennis made. Every lie Valerie told her clients. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. It also contains audio recordings, Gabe. Recordings of Dennis and Valerie. In their car. In restaurants. Talking about you. Talking about the old man. Talking about the burden. Talking about how long they would have to wait for you both to be gone. My blood ran cold. The ice in my chest from the cemetery, it was nothing compared to this. This was a frozen void. She wanted you to have it, Kendrick said. She told me, if they come for him like I think they will, Gabe is a carpenter. He needs all his tools. This is the hammer. I looked at the small piece of plastic. It was a hammer. It was an axe. It was a bomb. They're coming back, I said, my voice shaking, but now with that cold carpenter's rage. At 3 o'clock, a broker, to appraise the house. Kendrick looked at his watch. It was 11:30 a.m. Then you'd better get home, Gabe, he said. A flicker of something, a battle plan, lit up his eyes. You need to be there to let him in. I was confused. But the house is sold. It's in the trust. I know, Kendrick said, a grim smile playing on his lips. And so do I. But they don't know. Let them have their appraisal. Let them draw up their sales papers. Let them, as you said, get in their own way. I finally understood. Matilda wasn't just protecting me. She was giving me a choice. She had built a trap, a perfect, inescapable trap, and she was leaving it to me, to spring it. Go home, Gabe, Kendrick said, standing up. Play the part of the broken-down old man. Be the bother. Be irrational. And I will call you tonight. We have a lot of work to do before that house goes on the market. I stood up. I was still in my robe and boots. I picked up the USB drive. Thank you, Mr. Kendrick. Call me James, he said. We're partners now, Gabe. Let's not let Matilda down. I got back to the house just after 1 p.m. The bus ride was a blur. I clutched the small black USB drive in my robe pocket. It felt heavier than the $15 million. It felt like a weapon. I had one job: play the part. I was a carpenter, a teacher. I had spent my life building things, showing kids how to be patient, how to measure, how to see the project finished before they even made the first cut. Now I had to be an actor. I had to play the part of the broken-down old man. It wasn't hard. I was broken, just not in the way they thought. I went to the kitchen and looked at the clock. 1:15. The broker was coming at 3. I had time. I looked at the cold, congealed eggs in the pan. I looked at the wet ring on Matilda's recipe box. I didn't clean them up. I left them. A broken man wouldn't clean. A broken man wouldn't care. I sat in my armchair, the one facing the door. I put the metal box from the workshop back under the floorboard, but I kept Matilda's letter. I kept the USB drive. I put them in the pocket of my robe. I sat, and I waited. At exactly 3 p.m., a sharp, aggressive knock echoed through the house. Not a neighborly knock, a business knock. I shuffled to the door, making my feet drag on the pine boards. I rubbed my eyes hard to make them red. I opened the door. A man in a shiny blue suit stood there. He was young, maybe 35, with slicked back hair and a smile that didn't look like a smile at all. He looked hungry. He was already looking past me into the house, his eyes scanning, sizing it up. "Gabe Foster?" he asked, his voice overly bright. "Yes," I mumbled. I think so." "Todd Mitchell," he said, handing me a glossy card. "Valerie sent me. For the appraisal." "Appraisal?" I said, widening my eyes, faking the confusion I no longer felt. I don't know what you mean." "Valerie is Dennis, okay." Todd let out an impatient sigh. "Mr. Foster, your son and daughter-in-law scheduled this, to value the property. Can I come in?" He didn't wait for an answer. He just pushed past me, his expensive cologne filling the hallway. He was inside. My home. "Oh, yes," I said, shuffling behind him. The papers." "Yes. Dennis handles everything now. Since she..." I let my voice crack. I put my hand to my face, covering my eyes. I needed him to believe I was a complete wreck. Yeah, tough break," Todd said, pulling out a tablet and a laser measuring device. "Look, this won't take long. I just need to get the layout, take some photos. You just stay out of the way, okay? Don't touch anything." Stay out of the way, in my own house. I just nodded. "Of course, Dennis is a good boy. He handles the math. Matilda always handled the math." "Right," Todd said, clearly not listening. He started in the living room. He walked around, tapping the walls. "Good bones," he muttered to himself. "Original floors. We'd rip those out, of course. Open concept. Blow out this kitchen wall." He was talking about my home. The wall Matilda and I had built with our own hands, laughing as we spilled paint. He was talking about destroying it. He aimed his tablet and a flash went off. Flash. A picture of my fireplace. The one I built. Flash. A picture of the armchair I was sitting in. I watched him. This man, this stranger, walking through my life, reducing 45 years of memories into line items on an appraisal sheet. He went into the kitchen. "Ugh, this is a gut job," I heard him say, loud enough for me to hear. "Cabinetry is vintage." Vintage. I built those cabinets. I built them from a single cherry tree that fell in our yard in the storm of '92. I remembered the grain, the feel of the wood under my plane. Vintage. I just sat there. I let him. I let him walk through my bedroom. I let him open my closet. Matilda's closet, her dresses still hanging there, her scent. Good closet space, he noted. Flash. He was in the house for 45 minutes. 45 minutes of systematic violation. I just sat in the chair pretending to be half asleep, confused, pathetic. Okay, I'm done, he finally announced, walking back to the front door, already typing into his phone. Oh, I said, standing up, shuffling. So soon, Dennis? Is Dennis coming? I don't know what I'm supposed to do. He'll be in touch, Todd said, not looking up from his screen. They'll be in touch. Don't you worry about a thing, old-timer. We'll get this place sold quick. He opened the door and was gone. I stood in the silence. My rage was so cold, so pure, it felt like peace. Old-timer, gut job. Don't you worry. The trap was set. The bait had been inspected. Now I just had to wait for the rats to come back. They didn't come back until after dark. I had turned on the television. Some loud, idiotic game show. I was still in my robe. The cold, burnt eggs were still in the sink. I had to maintain the illusion. At 8 p.m., the key turned in the lock again. The door burst open. This time they were beaming. Valerie was glowing, her face flushed with victory. Dennis looked relieved. Deeply, profoundly relieved. Like a man who had just been pulled back from a ledge. Dad, you're not going to believe it, Dennis said. He actually sounded happy, his voice lighter than I'd heard it in years. I blinked at him, faking confusion. Dennis, oh, you're home. Did you see Todd? The man with the camera? We just got off the phone with him, Gabe, Valerie said. She was practically dancing into the room. She was holding a bottle of champagne. Champagne. My wife had been in the ground for just over 24 hours, and she brought champagne into my house. He said you were very cooperative, she said, coming over and patting my shoulder. A pat like I was a dog. Good job. We have fantastic news, Dennis said, going into my kitchen and pulling 2 of Matilda's good crystal glasses from the cabinet. This is a celebration. Celebration, I asked, my voice small. But, Matilda. Mom would want this, Dad, Dennis said firmly, his back to me as he struggled with the cork. She would want us to be practical. She would want us to be secure. And now we are. Valerie took the bottle from him. Oh, give me that. The cork flew across the room with a loud pop and hit the wall with a thwack. She giggled, a high, sharp sound that grated on my nerves. Todd appraised the property, she said, pouring herself a glass. She didn't offer one to me. He said the land is hot. The market is insane. We listed it high, but he thinks we can get a quick all-cash offer. How much? I whispered, playing my part to perfection. Dennis and Valerie looked at each other. They smiled, a shared, greedy, triumphant smile. $950,000, Valerie said, her voice full of triumph. 950,000. That's so much money, I said, my eyes wide. It is, Dad, Dennis said, finally sitting across from me, his eyes shining with a strange, feverish light. It's enough. It's enough to pay off everything. And there's plenty left over. And the best part, Valerie cut in, is that Todd knows a guy at Golden Horizons. He can get you moved in by the end of the week. This week, I said, my voice trembling. So fast. It's better this way, Dad, Dennis said. His voice softening, but it wasn't kindness. It was the relief of a con man who had successfully fleeced his mark. A clean break. You'll be settled in your new place before you even know it. We'll handle everything. The sale, the packing, everything. You'll be at Golden Horizons by Friday, Valerie said, raising her glass. And we will finally be able to breathe. I just looked at them. My son, his wife, celebrating, drinking champagne in my kitchen, while the smell of my wife's spices still lingered in the air. They were celebrating the sale of my home. They were celebrating my banishment. They were celebrating their $950,000. I just nodded. Golden Horizons, I whispered. It sounds nice. Valerie drained her glass. It is, Gabe. It's the best. You're going to love it. They left soon after taking the champagne bottle with them. They were going out to dinner, they said, to celebrate. I sat in my chair for a very long time. They thought I was going to Golden Horizons. They didn't know I was the one who owned the company that was about to buy Dennis's $2 million debt. They didn't know what Mr. Kendrick had told me. They didn't know about the USB drive. They didn't know the real math. Okay, Tilda, I whispered to the empty, silent house. The trap is set. Now, it's time to set the bait. I sat there in my worn-out armchair, the fabric thin and familiar. They were standing over me, Dennis and Valerie, energized from their victory. They had their $950,000. They had their appraisal. They had their plan for my banishment. All that was left was for the old broken man to sign on the dotted line. I had to give them the pen. I looked up at them, my eyes blurry. I let my hands tremble in my lap. Dennis, I whispered. My voice was weak, the voice of a man defeated. They both stopped their quiet, excited whispering. They looked at me, their faces impatient. The bother was about to speak again. What is it, Dad? Dennis asked. He tried to sound kind, but his voice was tight with the anticipation of his new life. It's just, there's one more thing, I stammered, twisting the old wool fabric of Matilda's robe in my hands. About Matilda, her will. I saw Valerie's eyes narrow. The smile faltered for just a second. Will, a legal word, a potential complication. Gabe, she said, her voice sharp, we've been over this. The power of attorney, it gives Dennis control. A will is just a formality. I know, I said, shaking my head, as if I were confused. It's not a paper will. She told me, she made a video. I saw them exchange a fast, almost invisible glance. A video will, I repeated, letting my voice crack. Just before the surgery. She made me promise. She said, Gabe, if anything happens, I want us all to watch it together, as a family. She said it was her last goodbye. I let a tear roll down my cheek. It wasn't hard to summon. I just thought of my wife, of her last days, of her strength. Valerie's expression instantly softened. But it wasn't sympathy. It was calculation. I could see her mind working, the gears turning. A video. A sentimental, tearful goodbye. This is it. The final emotional hurdle. We sit through the old woman crying on a TV. We pat the old man's hand, and then he signs everything. It's perfect. A video? She asked, her voice now dripping with fake, syrupy concern. Oh, Gabe, of course. Of course we'll watch it. If that's what Matilda wanted, it's the least we can do. Where is this video, Dad? Dennis asked, stepping closer. Is it here? I shook my head, looking as helpless as I could. No. I don't have it. She gave it to that man. The man from the bank. The one she knew from the charity board. Mr. Kendrick. James Kendrick. Kendrick, Dennis repeated. Yes, I said. She said he's the executor. That's the word she used. She said we all have to go to his office to read the will and watch the video, all of us, together. It's what she wanted. Dennis looked at Valerie. I could see the silent question in his eyes. Is this a problem? Valerie was already one step ahead. A lawyer's office, she said mostly to herself. An executor. This is it, Denny. This is the official transfer. The old man is too confused to understand. This is when we get him to sign the final papers in front of a witness. This is perfect. She turned back to me, her smile bright and reassuring. Gabe, that makes perfect sense. Of course. We need to honor her wishes. Dennis, catching on, put his hand on my shoulder. We should probably bring our lawyer too, just to, review the documents. Make sure everything is handled properly. For you, Dad. For me. I almost choked. Bring him, I thought. Bring your shark. My shark is bigger. Yes, I whispered. Whatever you think is best. You handle the math. Of course we will, Valerie cooed. You just tell us when, Gabe. We'll clear our schedules. Matilda said, she said in her note. I fumbled in my robe pocket, pretending to search for something that wasn't there. Oh, I must have misplaced it. But I remember. She said, as soon as possible. Tomorrow. Valerie beamed. It was happening faster than she'd dared to hope. Tomorrow is perfect, she said, pulling out her phone. I'll call Kendrick's office first thing. We'll set it for 10 a.m. 10 a.m. We will finally settle everything. And then, Gabe, we can get you packed for Golden Horizons. She patted my arm. A condescending final pat. You just get a good night's sleep. You've had a long emotional couple of days. Let us handle all the complicated details from here. Thank you, Valerie, I murmured, lowering my eyes. You're a good girl. A good daughter. Her smile was blinding. I watched them leave. They were giddy. They were whispering excitedly as they walked down the front path, forgetting I was still standing at the door. I stayed in the shadows of the doorway, the old wood pressing into my shoulder. The rain had finally stopped, and their voices carried clearly in the damp night air. So easy, I can't believe it, Valerie was whispering, followed by that high, sharp giggle I despised. He's completely broken. He didn't even fight. I told you, Val, Dennis said, his voice full of that false, manufactured confidence. He's devastated. He's not thinking straight. He's totally lost without her. He's just an old man. A video will, Valerie scoffed, opening the car door. How pathetic. She probably just cries and talks about the good old days. It's perfect, though. Kendrick will read the will, the old man will cry, we'll sign the papers, and the house is ours. $950,000, Denny. Can you believe it? By this time next week, all our problems will be gone. They got into their black Lexus. The engine purred to life. Yeah, I heard Dennis say, his voice distant as the door closed. All our problems gone. The car pulled away, its red taillights disappearing into the dark. I stood there, alone, completely broken, not thinking straight. Just an old man. I closed the door. I walked to the kitchen and calmly washed the 2 crystal champagne glasses they had left behind. A video will, Matilda, I whispered to the empty room. You magnificent, brilliant woman. They thought they were going to a funeral reading. They had no idea they were walking into their own execution. 10 a.m. tomorrow, I said to the silence. I'll be there. I arrived at 10 minutes to 10. James Kendrick's law firm wasn't in a flashy new glass tower. It was in an old stone building on Union Street, the kind with a brass plaque by the door and a lobby that smelled of old money leather and polish. I was wearing my only suit, the one I'd worn to Matilda's funeral. It was dark wool, 20 years old, but clean and pressed. I had shaved. I had combed my hair. If I was going to be a ghost at my own execution, I would at least be a tidy one. In my pocket, my hand was wrapped tightly around the small black USB drive. Kendrick greeted me himself in the lobby. He wasn't smiling. He just nodded, his eyes full of a somber purpose. "Gabe," he said, "are you ready?" "I am," I replied. "This way." The conference room was like something out of a movie. A massive dark mahogany table polished to a mirror shine. Leather chairs so deep you could sink into them. The walls were lined with books, thousands of them, bound in red and green leather. A large dark television screen was mounted on the far wall, invisible until you looked for it. I sat at one end. Kendrick sat at the head. He placed a single thick, blue-bound document in front of him. "They're bringing their own counsel," he said quietly. "I know," I said. "Dennis mentioned it. A man named Fletcher." Kendrick's lip twitched. "Ah, Martin Fletcher. Yes, I'm familiar with Mr. Fletcher's work. This should be interesting." At 10:05, the doors burst open. They didn't just walk in. They swept in. Valerie was wearing a sharp cream-colored pantsuit. Cream. Not black. Not even gray. Cream. It was a victory suit. Her hair was perfect. Her makeup was flawless. She looked like she was about to close a multi-million-dollar real estate deal, and I suppose in her mind she was. Dennis followed, wearing a new-looking pinstripe suit, a bright blue tie, and shoes so shiny they reflected the overhead lights. He looked like a man who had already spent the money he was about to get. And behind them was their lawyer. Fletcher. He was exactly what I pictured. He was all teeth-cheap cologne and a suit that was trying too hard. He was carrying a briefcase that he snapped open and placed on the table with a loud thwack, as if to claim the territory. "All right, Kendrick," Fletcher said, not even looking at me. "Let's make this quick. My clients are grieving. We're here to expedite the transfer of assets, as outlined in the durable power of attorney held by Mr. Foster here." He gestured to Dennis. Dennis just nodded, trying to look important, but he just looked like a boy playing dress-up in his father's clothes. Valerie sat down, crossed her legs, and began tapping her pen on a legal pad. Impatient. Always so impatient. James Kendrick just watched them. He let the silence stretch. He let Fletcher's aggressive words hang in the air and die. He was in complete control. Finally, he looked at Fletcher. "Counselor," he said, his voice smooth and deep like polished wood, "I am aware of the document you possess. However, it has no bearing on today's proceedings." Fletcher scoffed. "No bearing? It has every bearing. It gives my client full authority over his father's. It gives him—" Kendrick interrupted, his voice still quiet, but now with an edge of steel, "authority over his father's affairs, which he holds jointly with his father. It does not, however, supersede a legally executed and witnessed final testament, especially one that was put in place after that document was signed." Valerie's pen stopped tapping. I saw her knuckles turn white. Fletcher frowned. "What are you talking about?" Kendrick ignored him. He looked around the table at me, at Dennis, at Valerie. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he said, his voice resonating with formal authority. "We are gathered here today to review the last will and testament of Mrs. Matilda B. Foster. As the named executor of her estate, it is my duty to present her final wishes." Dennis and Valerie exchanged a look. I could read it perfectly. This is it. The video. The boring, tearful goodbye. Sit through this and we get the house. Valerie leaned back in her chair, a smug, satisfied little smile playing on her lips. She thought this was the final formality. She thought she had won. "Let's get on with it then," she said, waving her hand dismissively. Kendrick nodded. He placed his hand on the thick, blue-bound document. "Very well. First, let's discuss the primary asset in question. The property at 412 Elmwood Lane." Valerie sat up, her eyes gleaming. This was it. The $950,000. "Our broker Todd Mitchell has already appraised the property at $950," she cut in. "We have an all-cash offer pending. We just need Mr. Foster's final signature, which, given his fragile state, my husband will be handling via the POA. Kendrick looked at her. He didn't blink. I'm afraid there has been a significant misunderstanding. Fletcher actually chuckled. A wet, unpleasant sound. Misunderstanding? I don't think so, Kendrick. My clients are busy people. Let's not waste everyone's time with theatrics. He tapped his shiny imitation leather briefcase. We are here to file and confirm the expedited transfer of the property at 412 Elmwood Lane. My client, Mr. Dennis Foster. He gestured to Dennis, who puffed out his chest. Holds a fully executed durable power of attorney for his parents' estate. His father is, by his own admission, confused and grieving. We are simply acting in his best interest to liquidate the primary asset. James Kendrick didn't even look at Fletcher. He kept his gaze on the blue document in front of him. The power of attorney is noted, counselor, as is the fragile state of my client. He looked up and his eyes were like ice. However, regarding the property at 412 Elmwood Lane, that POA is irrelevant. Fletcher's smile vanished. Irrelevant. It's a binding legal document. It's the entire point of this meeting. No, Kendrick said, his voice quiet but filling the entire cavernous room. It's irrelevant, because Mrs. Matilda Foster sold the house 6 months ago. The silence in the room was absolute. It was so quiet I could hear the faint tick of the antique clock on Kendrick's wall. I watched Valerie. Her face went through 3 quick, ugly emotions. First, total confusion. Second, sharp, biting anger. And third, amused, condescending disbelief. She let out a sharp, barking laugh. Sold it? What are you talking about? That's absurd. She turned to her lawyer, Fletcher, as if he were an idiot. He's bluffing. I ran the county records myself last week. The title is clean. It's in the name of Gabriel and Matilda Foster. He's just trying to stall us. He's wasting our time. She turned her glare back to Kendrick. Sold it to who, Mr. Kendrick? The ghost of Christmas past. Kendrick didn't smile. He simply opened the thick, blue-bound document. Not to a ghost, Mrs. Foster. She sold it legally and irrevocably to a private trust. The sale was finalized 184 days ago. The county clerk's online portal is, as a real estate professional like yourself should know, often months behind on updating title transfers to private trusts. Valerie's face went chalk white. Her knuckles were white where she gripped her pen. What trust? What are you talking about? The Foster Education Trust, Kendrick said, reading from the page. A revocable trust established by Mrs. Foster 5 years ago. She sold the property to the trust for the legally binding sum of $10. The house, I'm afraid, no longer belongs to you or to Mr. Foster here. Dennis finally found his voice. It was a strained squeak. Who controls this trust? Who's the beneficiary? Valerie leaned forward, her eyes wide and suddenly desperate, a new horrifying hope dawning on her face. It's me, isn't it? She left it to me to manage for him as part of the family. James Kendrick looked at her as if she were a bug, something small and unpleasant he'd found on his desk. No. The sole trustee and lifetime beneficiary of the Foster Education Trust is Mr. Gabriel Foster, sitting right there. I just sat there. I tried my best to look as confused and frail as they believed I was. I widened my eyes and looked at Kendrick as if I didn't understand. But after him, Dennis choked out, his mind already calculating the next step, the next angle. It comes to me, right? After he's gone, it must come to me. James Kendrick slowly turned a page. No, he said simply. Upon Mr. Foster's death, the trust and all its assets, including the house at 412 Elmwood Lane, are to be donated in their entirety to the woodworking and carpentry program at Vanderbilt University. Boom. Fletcher dropped his pen. It clattered loudly on the mahogany table. Dennis made a small gagging sound in the back of his throat. Valerie just stared at me. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. The $950,000. Their payday. Their salvation from their $2 million debt. It was gone. It had evaporated. It had in fact never existed at all. Therefore, Kendrick concluded, closing the blue folder with a soft, final, devastating thud. Your power of attorney is utterly invalid regarding this asset. The appraisal you ordered yesterday was, legally speaking, trespassing. He looked at Fletcher. And this meeting regarding the sale of the house is over. Dennis's face went from a healthy, overconfident pink to a sickening, blotchy white. He made a small sound, a huff like he'd been punched in the gut. No, he stammered, shaking his head. No, that's not possible. She wouldn't do that. She loved me. Fletcher, the lawyer, was shuffling his papers, his own face slick with a sudden sweat. He was a shark that had just seen a bigger shark, and he was trying to find a way back to open water. This is highly irregular, Kendrick, Fletcher blustered, trying to regain his footing. We contest this trust. It was clearly signed under duress or when she was not of sound mind. My client's mother was ill. Kendrick didn't even flinch. He just looked at Fletcher with a gaze so cold it could have frozen coffee. Are you a medical doctor, Mr. Fletcher? Because I have a full psychiatric evaluation signed by 3 separate specialists, just 2 days before this trust was finalized, confirming Mrs. Foster was, and I quote, in full command of her faculties and possessed of a truly remarkable financial acumen. He slid a small bound document across the table. You may read it at your leisure, after we are finished here. Dennis was frantic now. The $950,000, his lifeline, his escape hatch from his $2 million debt, had just vanished. It was gone. But the money. He choked out, his voice cracking high and thin. He looked wildly around the room. The savings, the checking account. What's in the rest of the will? The money, Kendrick. Where is the money? He was pleading. A 42-year-old man in a pinstripe suit begging for a handout. Valerie, who had been frozen in a state of pure, silent rage, suddenly snapped her head up. Her eyes, which had been full of hate, now held a new, sudden, desperate spark. Money. He was right. The house was a loss, but the savings, the old man's meager pension. Ah, yes, James Kendrick said, as if he'd just remembered. He slowly opened the blue-bound document again. The rest of the will, the liquid assets, Mrs. Foster's estate. He looked at me, then at Dennis, then at Valerie. He let the silence hang, a perfect, agonizing pause. The house, as you now understand, was a minor asset, a sentimental piece of property. He put on a pair of small, gold-rimmed reading glasses. He looked down at the paper. Regarding the primary estate of Mrs. Matilda B. Foster. He paused again, reading silently. Valerie was literally on the edge of her seat, her body thrumming with tension. Well, she snapped. How much 10,020? James Kendrick looked up over the top of his glasses. He looked directly at Dennis. The estate is not a small one, as you believed. Matilda was a very prudent investor. Just say the number, man. Fletcher barked, his own curiosity getting the better of his professionalism. As of this morning's market close, Kendrick said, his voice flat, simple, and utterly devastating. The net value of the Foster Trust, excluding the properties, is $15,420,312.54. I had heard the number already, but hearing it spoken out loud in this room in front of them, it felt like a bomb had gone off. Fletcher's jaw dropped. Literally. His mouth just hung open. Dennis just stared. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe. All the color that had been left in his face, every last drop, drained away. He looked like a corpse. And Valerie's reaction was the most terrifying of all. She was silent for a full 10 seconds. Her pale, furious face, it transformed. The rage vanished. The hatred evaporated. Her eyes widened, not in shock, but in pure, unadulterated, ecstatic greed. It was the most naked emotion I had ever seen. It was like watching a wolf see a field full of defenseless sheep. A slow, strange, trembling smile spread across her face. 15 million, she whispered. She turned. She turned away from Kendrick, away from her husband, and she looked at me. Her face, which just moments before had been twisted in a mask of contempt, was now the kindest, warmest, most loving face I had ever seen. It was a performance that deserved an award. "Oh, Dad," she breathed. The word Dad was back. "Dad, I had no idea." She stood up, her chair scraping back, and she rushed over to my side of the table. She knelt on the expensive carpet right at my feet, right by my old, worn-out suit. She grabbed my hand, my rough carpenter's hand. Her own were soft and trembling. "Gabe, Dad, we're rich," she stammered, her eyes filling with what looked to a fool like tears of joy. $15 million. Oh my God, you're a millionaire. We're millionaires. She squeezed my hand, her rings digging into my knuckles. I'm so sorry, Dad. We were just worried about you being alone in that big house. We had no idea you were secure." I just looked at her. I just stared. My son Dennis was still catatonic, staring into space, his mind clearly broken by the math. But Valerie, she had recovered in 5 seconds. She had seen the new reality. She had seen the new target. The $950,000 house was gone, but a $15 million prize had just appeared, and it was sitting right in front of her, in a confused old man's body. "Dad," she whispered again, leaning in, her voice full of that fake, syrupy love. This changes everything. We're a family. We can buy a new house. A real house, all of us. Together. You won't have to go to Golden Horizons. You'll come live with us." She was already spending it. She was already moving me in. She was already in control. I just blinked at her. I let my hand tremble in hers. 15 million, I whispered back, my voice full of awe and confusion. "Matilda, my Tilda, did that?" "Yes, Dad," Valerie sobbed, pressing my hand to her cheek. "She did it. She did it for us." She thought she had won. She thought the game was over and she had just hit the jackpot. She didn't know. She hadn't seen the USB drive. She didn't know this was still just the bait. Valerie was still kneeling at my feet. Her performance was breathtaking. The fake tears of joy, the trembling hands clutching mine, the voice thick with manufactured emotion. "Dad," she breathed, looking up at me, her eyes shining with a predator's victory. I had no idea. $15 million. Oh, Gabe, Dad, we're a family. We can finally be a real family. You won't have to go to that place, Golden Horizons. You'll come live with us. We'll buy a new house, a real house. We'll take care of you. We'll take care of everything. She was already spending it. She was already moving me in like a piece of furniture she had just acquired. Dennis had finally snapped out of his catatonic shock. He stumbled over his face, pale and blotchy, and knelt beside his wife. 15 million, he whispered, as if the words themselves were a prayer. "Dad, I don't know what to say. We're set. We're safe. Safe. The word he chose. Safe from the loan sharks Kendrick had told me about. Safe from the consequences of his own disastrous life. Their lawyer Fletcher was recovering quickly. He was a shark and he had just seen a feeding frenzy. He was rubbing his hands together, his eyes gleaming. Well, well, Kendrick, this is quite a development. 15 million so, he said, pulling out his legal pad again, all business. We just need to see the distribution terms. I assume a standard split between the son and the spouse, or perhaps given Mr. Foster's age, a custodial trust managed by, not exactly counselor. James Kendrick's voice cut through the room as clean and sharp as one of my chisels. Valerie stopped stroking my hand. Her head snapped up. What do you mean, not exactly? I mean, Kendrick said, leaning back in his chair, that Mrs. Foster was, as I said, very specific. The distribution of her estate is not standard. In fact, she felt the standard terms were insufficient to express her final wishes. Fletcher's smile twitched. What are you playing at, Kendrick? Stop the theatrics. Just read the will. Oh, I won't be reading it, Kendrick said. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the small black USB drive I had found in Matilda's box. The hammer. Mrs. Foster, Kendrick continued, felt this was a message best delivered personally. He slotted the USB drive into the side of the massive dark television screen on the far wall. This is her legal and binding last will and testament. The screen flickered to life. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wasn't ready to see her again. It wasn't a professional video. It was a webcam recording, grainy and stark. And there she was. My Matilda. My breath caught in my throat. She was in her hospital bed, the one from the final weeks. She was wearing the old faded blue nightgown I had bought her 20 years ago. Her hair was thin. She looked so tired. She looked so small against the white pillows. But her eyes were not weak. Her eyes were burning. They were the eyes of the woman who had agreed to build a house with me from scratch. They were the eyes of a general. Valerie stood up from the floor, her face pale, confused. What is this? This is morbid. And then Matilda spoke. Her voice was a dry, papery whisper, but it filled the silent room with absolute authority. Dennis, Valerie. She stared directly into the camera, as if she could see right through it, right into this room, right into their black, greedy hearts. If you are watching this, she whispered, it means I am gone. Dennis let out a small broken sound. And it means you came for the house. The words landed. Not, you came to grieve. Not, you came to support your father. You came for the house. You probably came the morning after my funeral. Matilda continued, a small, bitter smile touching her lips. Like vultures. Am I right? Valerie let out a strangled gasp. What? How could she? Fletcher jumped to his feet. This is irregular. It's prejudicial. This is not a valid. This is her legally filed and witnessed video testament, counselor. Kendrick's voice boomed, shutting Fletcher up instantly. It is valid. I suggest you listen. Matilda on the screen coughed a dry, painful sound that tore at my soul. She took a sip of water, her hand shaking. You thought you were so clever. She continued, her voice stronger now. You thought you were dealing with two old, confused fools. One sick and one grieving. The perfect victims. Dennis was shaking his head, his hands over his face. No, Mom, no, we were just... I knew Dennis. Her voice was so quiet, but it cut through his pathetic excuses. He froze. I knew, she repeated, turning her head slightly, as if she could see him sitting right there. I knew about the debt. I knew about the $2 million. I knew about the loan sharks your father doesn't even know exist. I knew your consulting firm was a fantasy. I knew you were fired 3 months ago. Dennis made a sound, a high-pitched, terrified sound like an animal caught in a trap. He hadn't known she knew that. And Valerie? Matilda's eyes seemed to narrow, focusing on my daughter-in-law, who had backed away until her legs hit her chair. Oh, Valerie, did you really think I didn't know about the clients you were cheating, the 3 elderly people you helped sell their homes, taking a secret illegal commission? Did you think I didn't see the vulture in you from the first day you walked into my kitchen and appraised my floorboards? This is slander, Valerie finally shrieked, her voice cracking. She's lying. She was sick. She was on morphine. She was delusional. Kendrick didn't even pause the video. He simply reached down and picked up a file I hadn't seen before. It was thick, at least 4 inches thick. He dropped it onto the mahogany table. The thud was the loudest sound in the room. That, Mrs. Foster, Kendrick said, his voice cold, is the complete 6-month report from the private investigator your mother-in-law hired. It includes copies of your husband's forged loan applications. It includes the sworn affidavits from the 3 clients you defrauded. And it includes full transcripts of your phone calls. Valerie looked at the file. She looked at the screen. She looked at me. And her face, it just crumpled. The fight went out of her. She knew she was caught. She sank into her chair, her mouth open, silent. Matilda on the screen took a long, ragged breath. I knew everything. I knew you were waiting for me to die. I heard you. I heard you whispering outside my hospital room when you thought I was asleep. You called my husband, your father, a bother, a burden. You debated right there in the hallway how long it would take. My own heart stopped. My God. The words from her letter. She hadn't just suspected. She had heard them. She had been lying there alone, dying, and she had heard them call me a bother. So, Matilda continued, I decided to give you a test, a final test. She leaned in closer to the camera. Her eyes were blazing now. The house, the $950,000 house. That was the test, Dennis. That was the bait. I wanted to see. I prayed. I was wrong. I prayed that when I was gone you would step up, that you would be a son to your father, that you would protect him, comfort him, grieve with him. A single angry tear finally rolled down her pale cheek. I left him alone, broke and grieving, just to see what you would do, and what did you do? You came the next day. You came with your lawyer. You came with a fake power of attorney. You came to throw him out of his home. You came to put him in a cheap nursing home so you could steal his last asset. She paused, closing her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were clear. All the pain was gone. All that was left was the verdict. You failed, both of you, miserably. Dennis was openly weeping now, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. No, Mom, please. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'll fix it. I'm sorry. Valerie was just staring. Her face was a mask of stone. The gears were turning. She knew what was coming next. So, Matilda said, her voice flat, about my estate, my real estate. The $15,420,000. Valerie's head snapped up. There it was, the last desperate, stupid sliver of hope. Matilda looked right at her. Dennis, as my son, the son I raised and loved, I leave you this. The room held its breath. I leave you the full crushing weight of the $2 million debt you created. I leave you the consequences of your choices. I leave you the memory of the father you betrayed and the mother who saw you for exactly who you are. Dennis let out a horrible, broken wail. And Valerie, Matilda continued, her voice like ice, I leave you nothing. Nothing but the knowledge that you underestimated the old woman you were so eager to dispose of. And I am also sending a copy of that investigator's report to the State Real Estate Commission. Good luck with your license. No! Valerie screamed, a raw animal sound, lunging forward, as if to attack the screen. You can't, you old... Fletcher, their lawyer, grabbed her arm. Valerie, sit down, it's over. Matilda on the screen smiled, a small, weak, but utterly triumphant smile. And finally, my full estate. All of it. Every last penny. The $15 million. The properties. The stocks. Everything. It is to be transferred immediately and entirely into the Foster Education Trust. She paused, letting the words land. The trust, as you now know, is for the benefit of Vanderbilt University's carpentry program and is to be managed with full and absolute authority by its sole trustee. She looked right at me. Through the camera, through time, through death itself. She looked right at me. My husband, Gabriel Foster. He is not a bother. He is not weak. He is not a confused old man. He is the man who built our world. And now, he will manage this one. Live well, my love, she whispered. Build good things. The screen went black. The black screen of the television was a mirror. I could see the whole room reflected in it. My son Dennis froze in his face, a grotesque mask of disbelief. His lawyer Fletcher, with his mouth hanging open, his cheap bravado completely gone. And Valerie. Valerie was staring at the blank screen, her entire body rigid. Her perfectly manicured hands were clenched into white-knuckled fists on the mahogany table. She wasn't breathing. She was a shark that had just been told the ocean was empty. She made a sound. A low, wet, gasping sound. No, she whispered. No. She can't. She turned her movements stiff, robotic. She looked at me. Her eyes were no longer cold or calculating. They were burning with a hatred so pure, so absolute. It was terrifying. You, she hissed. You bastard. She tried to stand, to lunge at me, but her legs buckled. Her eyes rolled back into her head, and she collapsed. It wasn't a gentle faint. It was a complete boneless drop, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. She hit the thick carpet with a dull, heavy thud and did not move. Dennis didn't even look at her. His head snapped up, his face purple with a sudden, violent rage. He didn't point at the screen. He pointed at me. You! He roared, his voice cracking. You did this! He scrambled up, knocking his leather chair over. You! You poisoned her, you confused old man. She was sick. She was on medication. You got in her ear. You manipulated her. It was astonishing. His $2 million debt, his years of lies, his wife's fraud, all of it vanished, replaced by a simple, childish accusation. I had done this. I was the bad guy. She loved me. She always loved me. He screamed, tears of rage and self-pity streaming down his face. And you were always jealous. You turned her against me. You made her do this. Fletcher, their lawyer, saw his opening. He snapped out of his shock, his shark-like instincts taking over. He's right, Fletcher shouted, slamming his hand on the table. This is a clear case of undue influence. My client, Mr. Dennis Foster, has grounds to contest this circus. He gestured wildly at me. This man, by his own admission, his wife handled all the finances. He was the one who was confused. He was the one who was weak. He clearly took advantage of his wife's tintrang tinthan, her mental state, to coerce her into this vindictive, insane testament. He was good. He was spinning it, Fast. Valerie was still unconscious on the floor. Dennis was hyperventilating, pointing at me sobbing about how I had stolen his mother's love. It was a perfect picture of a loving son and a grieving wife being railroaded by a senile, manipulative old patriarch. They both looked at James Kendrick triumphant. They had found their angle. They had their case. James Kendrick just watched them. He let the accusations hang in the air. He let Dennis sob. He let Fletcher preen. Finally, after a long, painful silence, Kendrick spoke. His voice was calm, almost cheerful. I was rather anticipating that, counselor. Fletcher froze. What undue influence? Kendrick said, nodding. A claim that Mr. Foster here, the confused old man, somehow manipulated his brilliant, high-functioning corporate raider wife. It's a bold strategy. And you're right. Mrs. Foster's mental state, her tin-trang-tin-than, it would be the central pillar of your case. Exactly, Fletcher said, puffing out his chest. We'll depose her doctors. We'll find out what medications she was on. We will prove— Oh, that won't be necessary, Kendrick said, cutting him off with a smile that was all ice. You see, Matilda anticipated that too. He reached over and picked up the small black USB drive from the television. She was, as I have said, thorough. Dennis and Fletcher just stared at him. This video, Kendrick said, holding the drive up, was her will. It was her final testament. But she left something else on here. Something extra. Just in case you decided to challenge her sanity. He walked from the television to the center of the table where a sleek black speakerphone sat. He slotted the USB drive into a port on its side. This, he said, is her testimony. It's an audio file she saved from her private investigator's reports. The file, I might add, that I didn't even know existed until Mr. Foster brought it to me this morning. Matilda, it seems, even kept a few secrets from her lawyer. He looked at Dennis. He looked at Fletcher. He looked at Valerie, who was just beginning to stir on the floor. Matilda was worried you might claim she was delusional, Kendrick said. So she left this, a recording, of you, from 2 weeks ago, when you were in your car outside the hospital after you thought you had successfully convinced her to sign another document. You were celebrating. Dennis's face went from purple rage to a gray ashen terror. He knew what was coming. No, Dennis whispered. No, that's illegal. Is it? Kendrick asked. Let's find out. And he pressed the play button. James Kendrick pressed the play button on the speakerphone. The conference room was deathly quiet save for the sound of Valerie stirring on the floor. She pushed herself into a sitting position, groaning, her face dazed and white. Fletcher, their lawyer, was still standing, his face red, ready to argue his case of undue influence. Dennis was just staring at the speakerphone as if it were a coiled snake. A small click echoed from the speaker. Then the sound of a car door slamming. The sound of the black Lexus. And then Valerie's voice, bright and sharp, filled the opulent room. Audio. So easy, I can't believe it. I watched Valerie. Her head, which had been foggy, snapped up. Her dazed look vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp horror. She recognized her own voice. Then Dennis's voice. My son. Audio. I told you, Val, he's devastated. He's not thinking straight. He's totally lost without her. He's just an old man. Fletcher's face, which had been red and aggressive, began to pale. He was realizing in real time that his own client had just confirmed my exact mental state. He had just called the grieving, confused old man not thinking straight. He had just destroyed his own argument. The recording continued a spectral judgment from the night before. Audio. A video will, Valerie's voice full of mockery and scorn. How pathetic. It's perfect, though. Kendrick will read the will, the old man will cry, we'll sign the papers, and the house is ours. $950,000, Denny. Can you believe it? By this time next week, all our problems will be gone. Audio. Yeah, all our problems gone. Click. Kendrick stopped the recording. He let the silence hang thick and heavy as a shroud. Fletcher looked at his clients. He looked at Kendrick. He looked at the door. He was trapped. That recording, Kendrick said quietly, was time-stamped at 8:40 p.m. last night, just hours after you scheduled this sentimental meeting. It hardly sounds like you believed Mr. Foster here was in a fragile state. It sounds like you were celebrating his weakness. That's taken out of context. Fletcher stammered, but his voice was weak. His case was in ashes. Does it also take this out of context, counselor? Kendrick reached down and lifted the massive 4-inch thick file from the floor. The one Matilda's investigator had compiled. He dropped it on the table. The thud was the loudest sound I had ever heard. This, Kendrick said, tapping the cover, is the problem you were both so eager to solve. He turned his gaze on Dennis. Mr. Foster, your mother in her delusional state was very concerned about your finances. He flipped open the file. Page 1. A summary of your current liabilities. Outstanding high-interest loans to 3 unsecured lenders, totaling $1,974,000. He slid a photograph across the polished table, a grainy nighttime shot. Here you are, Dennis, last month, meeting with Mr. Anton Kovalchuk, a man I'm told who is not known for his flexible repayment plans. Dennis looked at the photo of himself with the loan shark, and he stopped breathing. He finally understood. This wasn't just about losing an inheritance. This was about losing his life. And Valerie, Kendrick said, turning his cold gaze on her. She had scrambled back into her chair, her cream-colored suit now smudged with dust from the floor. You were worried about the house, the capital. It seems you've been busy creating your own. He pulled out a separate, thinner file. This is the Valerie Mitchell file, also courtesy of Mrs. Foster's investigator. It contains the sworn affidavits of 3 elderly clients, a Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, a Ms. Elara Vance, all of whom you helped sell their family homes, all of whom you convinced to use a private title company, a company it turns out that you own through a shell LLC in Delaware. Valerie wasn't crying. She was just gone. Her eyes were empty dead. You skimmed nearly $400,000 from those sales, Valerie, Kendrick said. Theft from the elderly, a felony, several in fact. The State Real Estate Commission is going to be fascinated by this report, as I'm sure will the district attorney. Fletcher, the lawyer, looked at the pile of evidence. He looked at his 2 clients, one a bankrupt, terrified gambler, the other a white-collar criminal. He knew the game was over. He didn't say a word. He didn't make an argument. He didn't even look at them. He quietly, carefully snapped his cheap briefcase shut. He stood up. He smoothed his tie. I believe my services are no longer required here, he stammered. I will be billing you for my time. And he turned and he walked quickly, almost running out of the conference room. He abandoned them. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind him, leaving the 3 of us in the room. Me, Dennis, and Valerie. They just sat there, side by side, not looking at each other, not looking at me. They just stared at the polished mahogany table. They were broken, shattered, destroyed by the truth. Val setting. The woman who had brought champagne to my home was now completely still, her hands limp in her lap. Dennis, my son, my boy. He put his head down on the table next to the file documenting his ruin, and he began to weep. Not the loud, angry sobs of before. It was the silent, hopeless, agonizing weeping of a man who has just realized he has lost everything. His money, his wife, his future. his father and his mother. I just sat there, the carpenter, watching the collapse of the house they had built on lies, and I felt nothing. Just the cold, quiet peace of a job finally and perfectly finished. The only sound in the vast, opulent room was the sound of my son weeping. Dennis had his head buried in his arms on the polished mahogany table, his shoulders shaking with raw, agonizing sobs. They were the sounds of a man who hadn't just lost a fortune, but had lost his past, his future, and his soul all in one afternoon. Valerie was frozen. She was still sitting in her chair, bolt upright, her hands flat on the table. She was staring at the blank television screen, her face as white and empty as a porcelain mask. The only sign she was alive was the rapid, shallow pulse I could see beating in her throat. James Kendrick sat at the head of the table, silent, his hands folded. He had presented the evidence. His job was done. Now it was mine. I stood up. My old knees cracked, the sound loud in the heavy silence. Dennis's weeping hitched, but he didn't look up. Valerie's head turned slowly, her dead eyes fixing on me. I was just the old man in the funeral suit, but for the first time she was seeing me. I walked to the table. I looked down at the top of my son's head, at his expensive pinstriped suit, the uniform of a success he had faked, a life he had stolen. I looked at the woman who had been a vulture in my home. I spoke. My voice was quiet. It wasn't angry. It wasn't sad. It was just final. Dennis. Valerie. Dennis's sobbing stopped. He held his breath. Your mother, Matilda, she gave you every chance. She gave you 40 years of love. She gave you a home. She gave you a test. I paused, letting the words settle. You didn't just fail it. You chose greed. You chose this. I turned my full attention to my son. He slowly, painfully lifted his head. His face was a wreck. It was red, swollen, snot-streaked, and full of a shame so profound, it was almost ugly. He looked like a child. My child. Dennis, I said. My voice was firm, but it was a father's voice. I will not let you be ruined. Not like this. Those men, the loan sharks, I will not have them take your life. A small, pathetic spark of hope lit his ruined eyes. Dad, I am instructing Mr. Kendrick, I said, gesturing to the lawyer, to use the trust's funds to settle your $2 million debt. In full. Dennis's face contorted a mix of disbelief and overwhelming relief. Oh God, Dad, thank you. I'll pay you back, I swear. No. I cut him off, my voice turning to ice. You will not pay me back. You will never get the chance. This payment, this is your inheritance. It's the last dollar you will ever see from me or from your mother's legacy. It is your final portion. His face fell. Dad, what do you mean? I said, looking him straight in the eye. That after this is done, I do not want to see you again. You are no longer my son. He just stared, his mouth open, the words not registering. I turned away from him to Valerie. She was watching me, her eyes no longer dead, but burning with a sudden new calculation. He had lost, but maybe she. As for you, Valerie, I said. She sat up straighter, a desperate, feral look in her eyes. I don't need to do a thing, I said. Matilda already did. Her fake smile twitched. What do you mean? I said, picking up the thin file on her 3-count felony fraud, that my wife in her delusional state was a very civic-minded woman. Mr. Kendrick, did you send the file? James Kendrick nodded, a grim smile on his face. A full notarized copy of the investigator's report, including the sworn affidavits from her victims, was messengered to the Tennessee Real Estate Commission an hour ago. I believe they'll be scheduling a hearing very, very soon. The last bit of color drained from her face. Her career, her license, her entire identity. It was gone. "Good luck with your hearing, Valerie," I said. I buttoned my old suit jacket. I was done. I had done what Matilda had asked. I had measured, and I had made the cut. I left the conference room that day. I didn't look back at my son, his face buried in his arms, weeping over the ruins of his $2 million debt. I didn't look at Valerie, who was still sitting frozen in her chair, a living statue of greed and humiliation. I left the wreckage. I walked past the shocked receptionist in the marble lobby. I stepped out into the bright Nashville sunshine, my old funeral suit feeling heavy and wrong. I got on the bus. I went home. That was 6 months ago. I never bought a penthouse. I never moved into one of those glass towers downtown that Mr. Kendrick suggested. What would I do with all that space, all that cold, polished stone? A man who has spent his life with wood needs to feel the grain. I stayed in the cabin, my home, Matilda's home. It's different now. The house is still quiet, but the workshop is alive. The old faded sign I carved 40 years ago that said Foster's Woodshop is gone. I took it down. I replaced it with a new one carved from a beautiful piece of quarter-sawn white oak. The letters are clean, simple, and deep. The Foster Education Trust, Matilda B., Foster founder. My workshop is now an office, and on Tuesdays and Thursdays it is a classroom. Right now the air is thick with the sharp, clean smell of fresh-cut cedar. 3 young students, the first recipients of the Foster Trust Scholarship from Vanderbilt's carpentry program, are gathered around my workbench. Their faces are knotted in concentration. "No," I say, my voice patient. I tap the young man's chisel with my fingertip. His name is Leo. "You're fighting the grain, son. You're trying to force it. You have to let the wood tell you where it wants to break. Listen to it." I'm teaching them how to cut a mortise and tenon joint, the oldest and strongest joint in all of woodworking. It's the joint that holds a house together. It felt appropriate. Leo nods, blows the sawdust off the wood, and resets his chisel. The shh sound of the sharp steel slicing the fibers is the only sound in the shop. It is a good sound. I hear the crunch of gravel on the path outside, but I don't look up. James Kendrick walks in. He's not wearing his expensive 3-piece lawyer suit. He's in slacks and a polo shirt. He's been visiting more often ever since I showed him how to properly restore an old rocking chair. He says he likes the smell of the wood. He doesn't interrupt the lesson. He just leans against the doorframe, arms crossed, and watches. I finish showing Leo how to clear the waste from the mortise. "All right," I tell the students. "Take a break. Go get some water from the house. Don't let the cat out." They file out, nodding respectfully. "Afternoon, Mr. Kendrick." When they're gone, Kendrick walks over to the workbench. He picks up a long, perfect curl of cedar shaving and sniffs it. "I'll never get tired of that smell," he says. "It's a good smell." I agree, wiping my hands on my old canvas apron. "I just came from a meeting," he says, his voice casual. But I know it's not a casual visit. With Fletcher's replacement. The new lawyer Dennis and Valerie managed to find. I stop wiping my hands. I wait. The silence in the shop deepens. "They've accepted the offer," Kendrick says. "The trust will pay the $2 million debt in full directly to their creditors. In exchange, they have both signed a legally binding document. They will not now or ever contest Matilda's will." He looks at me, letting the news sink in. "It's done, Gabe. It's really finally done. The war is over." I stand there for a long moment. The final piece, the last loose end, the last string Matilda had left dangling. I thought I would feel a rush of victory, a surge of relief, a final burst of anger. I just feel quiet. I look at the young student's piece of cedar on my bench. He's still fighting the grain. I pick up my own chisel. I check the honed edge with my thumb. It's sharp. Good, I say. Just good. Kendrick looks at me, a small smile playing on his lips. That's it, good, Gabe. You just saved a $15 million trust and won the most righteous legal battle of your career. And you're not even a lawyer. I look at the joint I'm carving on a scrap piece, demonstrating for the students. The battle was won 6 months ago, James, I say, setting the chisel. This was just sweeping up the sawdust. I hear the students coming back, laughing about something. I turn back to the workbench, away from Kendrick, away from the past. All right, I say, my voice strong and clear as they gather around. Now watch this. When you cut the mortise, you don't just dig a hole. You have to respect the wood. You clear the waste, but you keep the walls true. I place the chisel against the grain. I tap it once with my mallet. A firm, clean, perfect cut. I continue my work. Matilda's legacy is safe, and so am I. This story teaches us a powerful lesson: never underestimate the quiet ones. Dennis and Valerie made a fatal mistake. They confused a life of simplicity with a life of weakness. They saw a broken, grieving old man they could manage. They never imagined he was a king protected by a brilliant queen. Matilda's plan shows that true power isn't found in expensive suits or impatient demands. It is built silently, with patience, integrity, and a well-measured plan. Greed makes you loud, but the truth is silent, and it cuts deeper than any knife. Let me know in the comments. Do you think Gabriel should have paid off his son's $2 million debt? Or was that a final devastating mistake?